And it wasn't just Western capitalism, it was Anglo-Saxon capitalism and liberal democracy that had won this idea.
Across most of the West. And that is a crisis of faith, when religious believers have a crisis of faith. It was, I walked around the perimeter of the green zone for most of the time before listening to Biden's speech and some of the sort of pageantry around the event. What struck me most was obviously the extraordinary security and the 28,000 or so National Guard in this sort of fenced, the whole Capitol Hill, the whole of monumental Washington was encaged. And it was very effective. I scoured the perimeter for protesters, for demonstrators. I came across a few sort of the traditional Christian types saying, you know, evolution is a lie, that kind of protester, but none of the MAGA, Proud Boy, Oath Keeper, QAnon people who just 2 weeks earlier, you know, had stormed the Capitol Hill building. So it was a very calm and a very pleasant event. And I have to say, you know, that the sense of toxins draining from the Washington system as Trump left the Capitol a few hours earlier was almost tangible. That might reflect my personal biases, but it's something that almost everybody I spoke to, including Republican friends of mine, shared. Trump's lost two things. First is the bully pulpit of the White House. That's really important, obviously. You know, the power of the president to intimidate, to command support, to arrange stuff should not be underestimated. And he's lost that. Perhaps even more importantly, he's lost Twitter and his Facebook accounts. And these were his principal tools of communicating and of whipping up support and pressuring people, intimidating people. To follow his will. He's lost those too. And I have to say, if I was asked which matters more to him, the White House or his social media accounts, I'm not entirely sure what the answer would be. So shouldn't underestimate that. That immediately weakens him. The degree to which he alienated elected senior Republicans with the incitement of the attack on Capitol Hill, and of people who were saying things like "hang Pence," should not be overlooked. I think if the inauguration had taken place without January the 6th having happened, I think plenty of Republicans would have waved him off. I think Vice President Pence would have waved him off. It's an open question. Mitch McConnell is key here. And Mitch McConnell will only do things that will advance his prospects of becoming Senate Majority Leader again. In other words, regaining control of the Senate in 2022. He's going to be making that calculation. I wouldn't dare predict at this point which way it would go, but I'd have to say it's got to be against. I can't see a huge chunk of the Republican Party inviting the mob to attack them, inviting primaries against them. I find that hard to imagine. Well, it was, as somebody said, the inaugural address, a love letter to truth, I think somebody wrote yesterday, which I think put it quite well. Biden sort of made that a central theme of his address. It was also interesting because, of course, the day of his inauguration was the day that Q, the anonymous social media poster who leads the QAnon movement, predicted would be the day of the storm, the great awakening, the dramatic events where Trump would retain power and there would be mass arrests of the deep state, satanic cabal who would be sent off to Guantanamo. These predictions are a deeply held article of faith amongst QAnon followers. And there was really interesting snippets of chatter from QAnon, Signal, and Telegram encrypted message groups saying, what happened? You were predicting it would all happen today. It didn't happen. We were conned. So there might be a degree of deflation of the alternative fact sort of conspiratorial universe from the peaceful and fairly traditional transfer of power yesterday, because that went against QAnon's central prediction. The larger sort of problem of fake news, of distrust of traditional media, of distrust of what we even define as a fact, I think is a function of mistrust in public institutions and in expertise. And I'm not sure how easy it's going to be to defeat that. You've seen studies of Facebook sharing patterns of demonstrably false stories exploded between 2016 and 2020 during Trump. So 2016, when he was at first elected, it was already a really bad problem. It is considerably worse today than it was then. So I don't think we should underestimate the scale of the challenge that Biden has set for himself, but I don't think we should also underestimate his sincerity in wanting to be as accurate and as consistent with facts as possible. And he'll showcase that with his public communication on the pandemic. And that's a pretty important way of showcasing the importance of verifiable information. I think it's no coincidence that Facebook and Twitter banned Trump and purged 70,000 QAnon accounts an hour or two after the Democrats regained control of the Senate, which was on the morning of January the 6th. The two Georgia runoff elections were confirmed Democratic victories. So I think the Mark Zuckerberg, Jack Dorsey, and others saw the writing on the wall. That you have a party now in control of both branches of government that is in favor of regulating big tech and of talking to Europe about this kind of thing. We're very different stance than we're used to from America. So I think their timing in banning Trump and others was opportunistic and to some degree preemptive. They wanted to show that they were on side. I have to say, based on conversations I've had and on some of my observations, that I don't think too many people were fooled. He's certainly laying out a very ambitious sort of set of bills to try and cater to that demand. Not just this $1.9 trillion pandemic relief bill, but several or $1 to $2 trillion green infrastructure bill is also in the pipeline, and all kinds of other pieces of legislation, such as immigration reform, which was the first bill that he sent to Capitol Hill after being sworn in on Wednesday. So he's certainly going to try. He's not lacking for ambition. The scale of the challenges and the range of the challenges that he set out in his inaugural address: repairing democracy at home, restoring America's global standing, leading on climate change, tackling systemic racism, and of course, defeating this pandemic. I mean, this is an extraordinary menu of epic challenges. But the key to a lot of them will be Republican, at least a modicum of Republican support. And I have to say, it's an open question. It's an open question as to whether they will meet his outstretched hand. Sees Europe as his primary partner in having a common approach to China, which is the predominant foreign policy challenge. So I think he's going to reach out to Europe, and I think that I think that there will be a common sort of desire to succeed, but they're quickly going to run into practical difficulties. So Nord Stream 2, that's now sort of being accelerated by Merkel. The recent Europe-China trade deal did not go down well with the Biden team. That's seen as sort of interfering with the desire for a common stance on China. And then I think, on various practical issues that we're familiar with, such as agricultural and pharmaceutical sector, there's going to be differences, long-standing American and European differences of opinion. Big tech is an interesting area, and tax, global tax coordination is an interesting area. I think things can be done in those fields. To some degree, yes. I don't see massive amounts of boots on the ground, American boots on the ground anywhere, but I do see strong measures to shore up the NATO feeling and to warn Putin that his time of exploiting American weaknesses or differences is over. I think Biden will be very clear on that. And of course, Turkey is a facet of that. Turkey's Erdogan's relationship with Putin has caused a lot of sort of disturbance here. Of course, the buying of the missiles from Russia too is a serious breach of NATO. So I think there's going to be some concern there in a sort of more immediate Eastern Mediterranean sense. I think that Antony Blinken and Jake Sullivan are going to be interested in the European perspective on Cyprus. So that might be an interesting angle that, of course, Trump had no interest in, none. I mean, when I wrote that book, the publisher wanted me to call it The Collapse of Western Liberalism, and I resisted. I think retreat, implies the opportunity to regroup and rally. And I think what we've seen in America is a regrouping. I think there is a reprieve here, and it will be a very important few years in America's story, but also in the broader sort of Western liberal democratic story, to see how Biden handles this. America came very close to danger, very, very close. And because of the actions of some admirable local officials and some judges appointed by Trump, some election officials in Georgia and Pennsylvania, the system held. But if, by quirk, there'd been a few thousand votes a different way in one or two of these states, I'm not sure that Trump wouldn't have succeeded in overturning the election.